Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's presentation, The View from Here. I am Christine Lund, the Interim Principal Dean at Martin Luther University College. Let me begin by acknowledging that while we are meeting together in a mediated space through technology, Luther is located on the Haldeman Tract, the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Luther is committed to seeing the experiences of all people and learning from them. And an important area of learning is about Canada's complex and often complicated history. We recognize in our land acknowledgement that we have much to learn to do in order to develop more just relationships with Indigenous peoples of Canada. If you are unsure of what Indigenous lands you might be living on, I would encourage you to go to nativeland.ca where you can find out by putting in your address. Tonight, through the support of St. John's Kilmarnock School, the Culchahworks Arts Collective, and the Eastern Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, we have the opportunity to learn and celebrate the contributions and history of the Black community. The history of the various Black communities in Canada has long been dismissed and silenced. And so I am so pleased that Andrew Craig is here with us tonight to share a program of songs and stories chronicling the past, present, and future of the Black experience in Canada. It is so important for us to learn and to celebrate the contributions from our neighbors so that we can work for a just and more equitable society. Let me say a few things about Andrew. Andrew brings a very rich and diverse CV, and I won't even attempt to list all of his accomplishments. When you registered for this webinar, you had opportunities to read about some of them. But Andrew is a magnificent musician, composer, producer, broadcaster, and teacher, and we are extremely fortunate to have him with us tonight. If you think you recognize his voice, you just might, because he was a national broadcaster for CBC for many years. In 2013, Andrew founded Culchahworks Arts Collective, which is a Toronto-based organization that celebrates stories drawn principally from the African Canadian, Caribbean Canadian, and African American cultural legacies. I'd encourage you to check that organization out and keep track of the other initiatives that Andrew and others are so involved with. Andrew is currently an upper school music teacher at St. John's Kilmarnock School. Following Andrew's presentation that will begin shortly, Cheryl Boughton, principal of St. John's Kilmarnock School, will facilitate a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session. The Q&A will be open through the presentation, so if you have a question, feel free to type it in, and Cheryl will be reading and collating those questions, and we'll see what we can address in that 10 to 15 minute time period. At the end of the Q&A, Bishop Michael Price will thank Andrew on our behalf. I also want to thank Matthew Rideout, who was the technician that supported Andrew to make this presentation, to Mirko and Kay at Luther, who have also supported the technology for this evening's presentation, and to Dr. Joy Phillip from Luther, who supported this project right from the beginning and has helped with many of the details to get us to this point. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Andrew Craig. And I know you can't hear our applause, Andrew, but it's here.
Greetings. My name is Andrew Craig. I'm the founder and artistic director of Culchahworks Arts Collective, as well as a faculty member here at SJK School in Breslau, Ontario. Thank you to Martin Luther College of Wilfrid Laurier University, its interim principal dean, Christine Lund, and faculty member Joy Phillip for initiating this project and supporting it to its completion. Thank you also to SJK School and the head of school, Cheryl Boughton, for partnering with us in this presentation. Thanks also go to Aita Sadhu of A Different Book List Cultural Center in Toronto for her support. Over the next hour, you will hear words from 6 different Black leaders from communities from Ontario to Nova Scotia. I asked each of them the same 4 questions. How do you self-define? What does Black History Month mean to you? Can you share a story from your lived experience that exemplifies Black resilience, triumph, and/or innovation? And finally, what message do you have for students? I think you'll find their responses to be riveting, powerful, and ultimately transformational. In between these words, you will hear music intended to amplify their messages. Music that came from a time when people of African descent were enslaved, and music from now, when the struggle for equality continues. Stay tuned also for a dance segment in the middle of our presentation that comes from an earlier Culchahworks presentation. At the end of the formal part of this, we'll have a Q&A. Cheryl Boughton and I will field your questions. Thank you once again for spending your time with us this evening. We hope that you find this presentation illuminating and inspirational. Once upon a time, hundreds of years ago, different people took care of the land we are standing on right now. They were nations of people, with names like the Mississaugas and the Haudenosaunee. These nations fought alongside the British Army in a war with the Americans. In that war, they lost much of the land they used to call home. The leader of the 6 nations was a man named Thayendanijah. Most know him as Joseph Brant. Our very own Brant House is named after him. He asked another man, Frederick Haldimand, who was then the governor of Quebec, to give his people land to pay them back for fighting in the war alongside the British. Haldimand agreed, and he gave the 6 nations a large chunk of land. Funny enough, now that land has his name. Instead of calling it 6 Nations land, it's called the Haldimand Tract. Our school sits on land that is part of the Haldimand Tract. The problem is that these 2 groups never really agreed on exactly how much land was to be given to the 6 nations, or exactly where their land begins and ends, and what land is still owned by the Canadian government. What's an even bigger problem? They still don't agree today, 236 years later. Some say there was agreement between the 2 parties, but the government has never honored it. Here's an even bigger problem. These kinds of arguments are still happening all over Canada, and they have been happening for hundreds of years. It seems that the people who came from other parts of the world to live here haven't been very good at respecting the people who were here when they arrived, the people who have been taking care of this land for thousands of years. All these things said, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples still have so much to teach us. Even though they have not been treated fairly, they are still willing to help us learn and grow. So let us give thanks for their permission to live and learn on this land. And let us acknowledge their rights as nations. And let us learn from moments like these, when we can all come together to treat each other with fairness, justice, and equality.
When the sun comes back and the first quail calls, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting just to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking gourd. Well, the riverbank makes a mighty good road. Dead trees will show you the way. Left foot, peg foot, traveling on. Follow the drinking good. Follow the drinking good. Follow the drinking good. For the old man is waiting to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking good. For the old man is waiting to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking good. Well, the river ends between two hills. Follow the drinking good. There's another river on the other side. Follow the drinking good. Follow the drinking good. Follow the drinking good. For the old man is waiting to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking good. For the old man, he's waiting to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking good.
Let's meet our featured speakers. Carol Ann Wright serves at the Halifax Partnership as the Director of Capacity Building and Strategic Initiatives for African Nova Scotian Communities. She was the first Black woman to run for the Mayor of Toronto and came in second place. Tom Allison has earned the distinction of being one of Canada's most successful Black actors. He's been nominated for almost every theatre, television, and film award in Canada, and received the Canadian Screen Award our equivalent of an Emmy, for his work. Tom's father, Milton Allison, served as a black porter on Canada's railways for 38 years. Janelle Scarrett serves as the Vice President of Vibrant Communities and Poverty Reduction at the Neighborhood Group in Toronto, among several other roles. She was named one of Canada's 100 most accomplished black women in 2018. Kwame Williams provides mentoring to youth, community businesses, organizations, and individuals. He has a long history of service to the public through his work in various levels of government. Kwame and Janelle, husband and wife, co-own Adinkra Farm. For over 10 years, Adinkra Farm has fostered cooperative community building based on the principles of African leadership. Selena Caesar Chavan heads her own consulting firm with a focus on organizational psychology and strategy. After serving as a Liberal MP, she very publicly left Justin Trudeau's government due to her experience of racism, microaggressions, and tokenism. Ms. Caesar Chavan has published a book about her experiences as an MP. Anton Skerritt holds the distinction of being a two-time Olympic athlete. In 2014, he was inducted into the Howard University Sports Hall of Fame. Over the past 30 years, Anton's focus has been in education, and he currently serves as the principal of Birchmount Park Collegiate School in Toronto, Ontario. Elle Jones writes poetry, teaches at the university level, hosts educational radio, and engages in activism from her base in Halifax, Nova Scotia. She earned the title of National Spoken Word Champion twice. She served as the Poet Laureate for Halifax from 2013 to 2015.
The best description for myself is a community organizer, and I think I've been that person since I was 9 years old. In the Black community of Beachville in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The work that I've done over the years have been variations on a theme in terms of community organizing. So that's the description that I will always begin with. My present position, I am the Director of Capacity Building and Strategic Initiatives for African Nova Scotian communities in Halifax, Nova Scotia. You know, I'm a mom, a grandmother, all those things, and a child of community, you know, at this age still. I still learn as I go.
I see myself firstly as an African woman, and I don't take that lightly. I see myself as on a continuum of existence that connects me to my ancestors as far back as I can know and beyond. And then moving forward, I have a responsibility to those here now and to prepare a way for those in the future. So I am a part of a long line of African women and men who had something to do with my existence as well. And I'm just carrying my part of the relay, as it were.
I mean, artist, yes, but performer, but changing now. I'm going to directing and other things. But really, what it is, I want to. I'm someone I know that I know I've been brought into this world to bring joy to people, and that doesn't just mean like performing. It means lightening spirit, lifting energy. You know what I mean? Like making people feel what's possible with a positive energy, and how that can turn the world, how we can change energy. I'm the energy changer. Because that's really what I am, and that's really what I'm meant to do. And I find myself looking at things that bring me closer to whatever that means, whatever facilitates that to people.
I think that I've been blessed to have a great life. You know, having been born in Trinidad, as I mentioned, grew up in Canada, spent most of my life here, and then having traveled the world as an athlete and through work. I think it's coming to the end of my career. I see myself being able to give back to the community and allow young people to enjoy the life that I've lived. So that's kind of one of the things that I really think that it's somebody at my stage of life, if I'm able to do that, if I'm able to share that kind of life with someone else and let them live through what I've done and maybe exceed the things that I've done, and that would be a great blessing for me, is to be able to allow young people to do that.
I self-defined as a Black woman. I use pronouns she, her. I am an advocate who fiercely loves her community, an author, someone who really is determined to ensure that equity, justice permeates through every single system that exists. So just whether it comes to mental health or healthcare, justice, etc. I love my community and I want to see equity in all systems.
I think I self-define as an African man who belongs to the world because I was born in the diaspora and I am of the diaspora. Being of the diaspora, I am very much aware of how I'm shaped by our history outside of the continent. I bear the scars of enslavement and anti-Black racism and all of those, but I also am fortified by the strength of the people that I come from. I'm fortified by our strength in mathematics and science and the cultural arts and all of those creative and innovative aspects that have evolved as quite the norm for people of African descent, whether they be on the continent or off the continent. And so as I said, I feel as an African man that I come empowered with an entire journey of our people. You know, I was born in Europe, as a matter of fact. And so, you know, if I look at even my path in life, it has been a full journey to here in Canada. And then all of the experiences that I had in my 50 years, over 50 years of living in this country.
My name is Elle Jones. I live here in African Nova Scotia, specifically in Halifax, Jabuktuk on Mi'kmaq territory. I'm a poet. I'm a community advocate. I think my heart is mostly with people facing state violence. So most of the work I do, or most of my day, is taken up with particularly working with people inside prison. So working towards liberation with them, working on like wrongful conviction cases. I'm going to tip my screen down for a minute. So who is Randy Riley? This is a case that we're fighting, a wrongful conviction of African Nova Scotian man accused of murder. You can go to his website, whoisrandyriley.com, and check that case out. We've been fighting that for almost a decade from the time that he's been incarcerated. I also do a lot of work on people facing state violence at various other sites. So people inside forensics hospitals, people facing deportation, and women living in shelters, people facing the child welfare system. So I would say that's most of my work. And then the way that I fund that is by working as a professor, working as a writer, and doing those kind of, particularly around writing jobs. But I think my real self and heart is in that work I do with people behind bars.
So I have a lot of feelings about this month. It's too short. There's too much piled into it. Those of us that have been doing this work for years get called to do, a lot of stuff that is important. But we need to expand this throughout the year. So, I recognize this as a spotlight month. It's a month that puts the spotlight and the energy on Black folks for a month. My problem is that it dissipates, beginning of March.
For me, it is about an opportunity to pause. I kind of look at it this way. We need to eat a meal every day. So we need to really be conscious of our history every day. But there are certain times when we have that extra special celebration meal, where we bring out all the good dishes. And I see Black History Month as that opportunity to pause and really focus a little bit more and be mindful about what we're doing in acknowledging the contributions of people. So it's not that I know that there's a lot of talk about, oh, why is February the shortest month? And it's not, doing justice to the history of African people. But I think that I think of it differently. I do think of it as like that big celebratory feast, that time when we pause and really intentionally think and recognize those things in the past. And lately, I've been really attracted to the idea of Afrofuturism and and connecting it. And the Sankofa bird that is reaching back for its egg, moving, feet are pointed forward. And of course, its body is here in the present. So that connection between past, present, future, and between the different generations, and that connection is really more prominent in my thinking of late.
I'll pretend. I don't quite know in some ways. My father told me that our background, my father who's Black, told me that our background is Ethiopian. He doesn't know how far back that goes or how he knows that. But I know that our family, we were one of the first families of Abraham's Plains in Nova Scotia. We were with the plaque, at the church in that area. We were one of the families that got land for helping the British fight in the War of 1812. So I know there's a history there, but where that comes from, I've never known, and he hasn't known. So I don't know how far back that goes. I don't know what my connection and ancestry is to Africa, other than knowing there's a background there that reaches back, of course. But what that means, I don't have all the information of. But certainly, I feel like there's the Africa that is in Nova Scotia. I feel like the people there, I feel like I'm related to half of them somehow. And the connections there are deep from growing up with my dad's family.
Very interesting question. Again, coming back to my background, being a Canadian, grown in Canada, but born in Trinidad. When I came home, it was from school every day. I came into a West Indian household. So it was like living in Scarborough, but when I stepped into the house, it was as if I was stepping into Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, with the food and the culture and the lime and the hangout and all of the rich things that come with that. And so when we talk about our culture, and as an educator, some of our students believe that Black History Month is all about the song and the dance and the music. And nobody likes to sing and dance and play music and enjoy music and food and things the way I do. And so I enjoy that aspect. But as far as African History Month and Black History Month is concerned, I always encourage the students that I work with to get engaged on a deeper level in terms of expressing their culture through more than just food, more than just song, and have the people who come to, let's say, for example, a Black History Month event at our school, have them edified and have them leave the building with more knowledge about African history than when they came in.
Well, I think it's really a time, not really for us. For us, I think Black history has been 365. We don't have a choice. We saw the Ontario Black History Society at the latter part of 2020 sort of do that history example where they blacked out the pages of history books and kept only the content related to Black history. And in a book that had 200 plus pages, maybe 13 of them had any reference, not a whole page, but just reference to Black history. So we need to live it, breathe it, honor it in our culture, in our lessons, and everything that we do 365. I think in this month, and especially post 2020, is an opportunity to not just talk about the history of Black people in Canada, but also push the status quo such that there is equity in our system, so that people who are all of a sudden woke understand that we have been awake for a very long time.
Black History Month for me is a time of reflection and a time of planning. So I have looked at it as an opportunity for us to have an iconic period that doesn't say this is the only time that Black history is important. I think people who take it that way have missed the point, and Jean Augustine herself, I've heard her voice this many times. The idea was to have a period that would be iconic, as Janelle put it, the period of celebration, the period of focus, etc. But it is clear that, at least to me, that we celebrate our history every day. I am telling the young people in my community and having discourse with other elders and so on myself every day. And so I am learning and celebrating.
Recognizing that the people who initiated it, giving much props to what went into making sure that there is a Black History Month. I respect that and honor that. But at the same time, we need to build on that and make sure that the work we're doing during February is done throughout the year. And I think we're doing that to an extent. So, it's still an important month, but I think we need to make sure that intensity is carried throughout the year in terms of our history and our presence.
The best ways to do that, I think, is to have a combination. And when at the high school I worked at, when I first began teaching, it was just a fabulous experience for Black History Month, because students put on plays that had some deep themes that were able to be expressed through the drama, through the music, through the food, and those types of things that kind of left a rich ground for discussion beyond Black History Month. Because I like to take Black History Month outside of February and spread it out over a period of time. The students that I have worked with, I've kind of implored them to take Black History Month out of February, spread it out over the other 10 months that we're together in school, and basically have things that kind of thread throughout the year that express their Blackness and allows them to bring their authentic Black selves into the class and into the school.
There's a couple of gentlemen that I speak to off and on within our community, and I love talking to them because they are really walking encyclopedias of our history in Canada.
Yeah.
And so I learn myself, even though I am becoming an elder, I learn myself about our place here and what our experiences have been, what we've attempted, what we failed at, what we've succeeded at, and so on. And so for me, Black History Month itself is an important opportunity to focus and to plan for the rest of the year. To plan, how are we going to celebrate Black history for the rest of the year?
When I work with staff as well, one of the things that we talk about is, are you allowing our students to bring their authentic selves into the classroom? And so what in the classroom, what in our school indicates that you are welcome here in this building. You are able to bring your authentic African, Caribbean, Norwegian, indigenous self, whatever it is, to the building. And so African History Month is kind of a jumping off point for all of those things.
And so Black History Month, I think in 2021 and going forward, has taken on a new meaning where it's more around activism and advocacy for our communities, with the context of understanding our history and the brilliance of knowing our now, because we didn't just wake up. And that's, I think, what Black History Month in the context of 2021 should be about. It's about action. It's about intentionality. It's about that knowledge, but it's about moving forward in a way that we are intentionally being cognizant of the equity that's required in our communities.
Well, I favor African Liberation Month. And the reason for that is that I believe that the point of studying our history is so that we can take lessons to move forward in the struggle. So if we just reduce Black History Month to a series of firsts, the first person to do this, the first person to do this, the greats of history, we also imply that somehow revolution is beyond us, that it requires these great people to do it, when in fact revolution is in all of us. Liberation lies in all of us, and it is all of our capabilities and all of our duties and responsibilities, and we all can do it and must do it. So what I think this month is for is teaching us the lessons of history, encouraging us to understand our political past so that we can build a different kind of future.
We shall overcome. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall all be free someday. Deep in my heart, yes, I do believe. Yes, we shall overcome. We shall overcome. Yes, we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall
First, there's too many stories to share in this this moment, these few moments we have. I have been honored and blessed to be part of several. So I'm going to give you, the short story from Toronto and a short story from Nova Scotia because they are linked. And it links, and I can't tell one story without talking about the other. So the Women's Health, Women's Hands is a health organization that is still in existence in Toronto. And I have the privilege and honor to be one of the founding staff people, one of many of that organization. And it has its own history. And there's a video that's been made of it, around that work. And that was a lot of community mobilizing of women, particularly Black women and racialized women in health in the 90s, in the early 90s. To see that center still stand and the work that was being done, the work that was done to get it to where it needed to be was one of those innovative pieces because women mobilized for it. It was a community call. It wasn't for people sitting around a table saying, here's what women need in terms of health. I was one of 3 organizers who went out in the community and did surveys, talked to women, and we came back and women said, this is what we need. And it's still a very unique place to go for women's services. The other is being home and doing the work that I'm doing. And the fact that we just launched, I think in September, the first African Nova Scotian economic strategy, the first of its kind, in Nova Scotia. And I'm really proud of that work because that was also a result of, community involvement and making sure that it wasn't anything new. This was all the work that the community has identified over the years, things the community have said. And while we had some traction on those things, we had traction for a couple of years, and then we would notice the rollback of funding. So it wasn't the fact that it wasn't a good project. The issue was, government was no longer interested in that. Community was still interested, but government wasn't. Government changed and have other interests, and community gets impacted by that. So we were very, the community began to think about what is it that would keep our issues in the forefront and give us agency about how we deliver and implement the things that we need, that we know that need to happen. And the community, with community input, we came up with a 5-year strategy to even begin those things.
My life story is that, and my life experience is that. It's a story of resilience and overcoming obstacles, and not just myself. I'm thinking of my family's journey from Trinidad to Canada. When my parents came to this country, they came to this country because they wanted us to have a better life, the children to be educated and have more opportunities than they had. And so it's incumbent upon us as this generation, this kind of first generation Canadian, to do better than our parents did. And so I think that the resilience that our parents has shown in terms of overcoming the obstacles of coming to a country that the degree it's 30 degrees Celsius cooler than they're accustomed to in their homeland. And when they come here and they make that sacrifice and they're working 3 jobs to pay the mortgage and put a roof over our head, and so that we can live in a house instead of an apartment building, or so that we can have the finer things in life that they didn't have, and to have the access to academics that they didn't have. I think that example of resilience that we get from our families lives in us.
My father was an extraordinary man in that he had his face to the sun all the time. He was uncomplicated, but so loving. He loved people. He was a porter for Via Rail for 38 years. And he loved the job, and not about the serving people, because it wasn't that. It was the doing. It was the experience of meeting people and traveling. And he never entered a room as a less than in his entire life. He was always, in his mind, every person was equal, and he would treat everyone the same way. And people loved him so much. And he was called, half jokingly but half seriously, the mayor of Winnipeg, because he seemed to know everyone and everyone loved him. Heads of presidents of companies and garbage men and people, everyone seemed to know who he was and love him. I'd run into people randomly that you would never think he'd ever have contact with, and they go, "Wait, are you Milton Allison's boy?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Oh my God, yeah, your dad talks to me all the time." I'm like, how did you even know him? How did that happen? But there's something about him in terms of how he took wherever he came from, which was little town, up in sort of the hills of Nova Scotia, like a 2-seater outhouse they grew up with, not even like indoor plumbing, pumping water in the kitchen, boiling water for a bath. But the sense of human pride he had, and certainly Black pride, just as a man and as a Black man, that had no negative connotation for him, I think comes from my grandparents, my grandma and grandpa, who were sort of amazing, loving people. But he never seemed to ever feel he was less than anyone else. But he approached everyone else the same way. And so I think he just disarmed people. If there was something there that was racist or that was unloving or that was ungenerous.
I can think of so many examples. So, I'll just go home. My grandmother raised us as we lived in a household with her as the matriarch, the older generation. And what I admire and what inspires me about her life story is that she was widowed at the age of 33. She had 5 small children, and she, to me, is the epitome of resilience because she knew how to sew. So she had a sewing business, and she sewed wedding dresses and curtains and every imaginable thing. So, that was part of that story. But she also was an extremely talented chef. And so she was able to, at one time, run a roti shop. And one of the things that I think carries through in me that was a part of her life is that there's always a giving and always an open door for people in need. So when she had the roti shop, there would be people who would come to eat. And when she taught me to cook, it was always to have a little bit extra in the pot in case someone came by and they were hungry.
And so for me to easily give up when I'm confronted with an obstacle is an affront to the struggle that our parents have had coming to this country. And so in academically, I grew up at a time when there wasn't an expectation that a Black student is going to be excellent. And yet in grade 5, I was able to skip from grade 5 into grade 7 and did not complete grade 6 because I had done all the work already for grade 6 because my teacher recognized that I was ahead of my class. So I don't know, that's not done anymore, but that was something that happened to me as a result of the one teacher recognizing that I was able to succeed at a level higher than my cohorts in my grade.
He seemed to disarm them. He was so, I know he was so loved in his work as a porter that if there were white foremen, above him as leaders of the porters, which often there would be, if there was someone who was racist, he never took that as anything that was about him. That was about them, and he just kind of bypassed whatever that was. And the white people who were in power over top of them in the offices, if there was a report on someone who was being racist or who was being unpleasant to the porters, they'd call my dad and go, "Milton, we're hearing this. What's happening? What's actually going on? Is there a problem? Is he really a bad person?" Like about a white person. And Dad would go, he was so diplomatic. He wouldn't just say, "Yeah, they're terrible and racist, get rid of them." He'd be funny. He'd be like, "Well, let's put it this way. The bunch of us won't be invited over for dinner anytime soon." And they'd be like, "All we need to know." And they'd be dealt with.
Oh, man. So I'm going to do one that's a little bit provocative, if you don't mind. I think when we think about resilience as a Black woman, we tend to think of the strong Black woman trope, right? Where we're supposed to stay and, fight and, no matter what's happening, we, knuckle up. And I would say the thing that most, for me, exemplifies or personifies that resilience is leaving politics when I knew that love was no longer being served to me. Leaving and sitting as an independent was a statement in the powerfulness of Black womanhood, in the ability for us to say, not today. In the ability for us to finally acknowledge that no matter what your title is or who you are, we are not subject, or we are no longer making ourselves subject to your oppression or your racism or your sexism or your misogynoir or any other kind of discriminatory behavior. We're saying not today, and we mean it.
If I think about my family and some of the iconic people of the last century, my grandfather and grandmother would have to stand head and shoulders, perhaps, above many others. They were a couple who got married very young, and my grandmother may not have had more than an education up to about the equivalent of grade 3. But my grandparents were determined people that their children would be educated, and that their who came after them would prosper based on what they were going to instill in them and whatever economic foundation they could muster. And they set out to do that in a very systematic manner. My grandmother, who, as I said, didn't have more than a grade 3 education, was the one who taught everybody to read and write. Okay? And so all of us, we have a family tradition of reading and writing before we go to school.
My experience as an athlete, I had coaches who believed in me wholeheartedly. And then when I went to the national team, for example, in 1987 in the World Championships, I had a coach who did not believe that I could run as fast as I ran. So when I qualified for the semifinals in the World Championships and set a Canadian record and said a person had a personal best by half a second, he was in disbelief. And so overcoming his disbelief and his lack of confidence in me was a struggle, and was a testament to the struggle that my parents and the strength that my parents have instilled in me to do the things that I can and will do in my future. So that's taught me a lot.
What I realize now is that gave us an incredible leg up to begin with. So I, for example, in my elementary education, was skipped about 3 times, right? And it launched me into an understanding of myself, that I had the ability and the capability, and it was, that the excellence was mine to have, because they showed me how you achieve excellence. And I spend a lot of time now trying to pass on to young people the knowledge of how to achieve excellence. What is it that you need to do? Whether it be soccer, whether it be academics, science, engineering, whatever it is. Yes. But there's a culture that allows for the building of excellence. And I would say that my grandparents, they probably learned it from their parents, no doubt. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying that this was an incredible display of resilience for people who didn't have much.
We're always really proud to say this is not new work, but this is work that we need to continue to build on. The foundation was laid by our ancestors and those freedom fighters that have gone on before us, who have been very diligent in saying these things are important. Things around life and living, things around employment, housing, education, all those things. And what we see and define as success, what we see and define as progress for us, so what's for us and by us, and how we deliver that is really critical. And this plan does just that.
The company that I've started now speaks about athletics, education, and life. And the lessons that I've learned in athletics have taught me about life. There's a number of all the soft skills that businesses are looking for right now in people, the teamwork and the perseverance and all communication and leadership and all of those things I learned through athletics. And so that's allowed me to get to the position that I am right now as a principal, because I treat it like an athletic event at work. I attack it with that fervor, that energy that I did in athletics, and it served me well. So overcoming obstacles in life and sport and life has come naturally to me as a result of the example of my parents and also my own experience throughout my athletic career.
One time I was sitting down with my cousins that we were little boys in the house together. And in our discussion, we realized that without ever coordinating with each other, we all have MBAs, master's degree. You know what I'm saying? Even the ones that didn't think that academics itself was the be all and end all, like me, acquired those things because it was part of a fundamental precept that our grandparents passed on, that you had to achieve excellence. You had to educate yourself. You had to become an expert at something and then understand how that helps your own community. These are the lessons, I think, of resilience, certainly, that I now try to pass on to my children and other young people in the community.
And in that work, you may or may not know that in Nova Scotia, there are about 20 Black communities in the province. And I am a child of one of those historic Black communities that were established in 1812. Seeing the work that the folks that in that community have done around reconciling the issues, policy issues around zoning that were detrimental to African Nova Scotian communities, and we're now seeing some traction on that being changed, and the erosion of those communities is now been met with us being able to expand those communities and be able to develop the land in a way it had been established, because As you might know the story of Africville, where a whole community was demolished based on city policy. And that was, and that was a telling thing for African Nova Scotian communities, is that that will never happen again, and not on our watch. And we kind of let that get away from us, but we're coming back to that, and we want to see Africville rebuilt, because we are seeing our communities take agency and power over the land that we are keeping, right? Because we recognize that, this is Aboriginal land, but we have been keepers of this land since the 1600s.
A young woman with a baby, clearly a new baby, and a young mother was traveling alone. The berths where they have the seats in the daytime and they come down to like bunk beds at night. She was sort of in one of those sections, and he had passed by a couple of times and done some, gotten some things and done the bottle for her or whatever. Was always happy to take care of stuff, and she was so ragged and exhausted. And he kind of rearranged his day a little bit. He was really good at getting stuff done really efficiently. So he arranged, he had about 45 minutes of time, he knew. And he went to her, and she was kind of half nodding off, and the baby was crying, wasn't being still. And he said, "So, listen, you look like you could use a little rest. I have some time off at 45 minutes. How about I sit right here? I'll take your baby if you'll trust me with your baby, and I'll watch your baby, and I'll be here so you know that she's close by, and you have a little nap." And he said the woman burst into tears and was so grateful. And he sat in the seat with the baby, and he was so good with kids that the baby stopped crying as soon as he touched the baby, and just was giggling and laughing. And he sat there and played with this baby for 45 minutes on this break he had, so that she could get a sleep. And then went on with his day and did his thing.
When we didn't have money to, shop at the fancy decor stores, she could run a piece of cloth through the sewing machine, and we'd have new drapes for the holidays and things like that. And so I think that that's the story of resilience, around building our own skills, tapping into our creativity as people of African descent, and not being not being limited by this is what you're good at and that's it. We have multiple talents, and that's what I'd say, because my grandmother was also a teacher and a tutor, and I've done those things. I'm not so good at the sewing, but definitely I'm picking up on the cooking and the creativity and the teaching and the mentoring and the nurturing of community from my grandma. Yeah.
And our place in Canadian history sets the groundwork for all Blacks who come after us. So the presence of Black folks in Canada starts in Nova Scotia. We're the oldest population of Blacks in Canada. And that's where everybody else comes in. And we should be talking about that, not in terms of where we come from, in terms of the continent or the Caribbean. We should, but here's where we started, and everybody else who's come after that should be able to go back to the 1600s and say, our presence starts here. So we are happy in terms of the kind of work that is happening that allows us to be able to reestablish our communities the way that we want. We know why we were put there in the first place. If you look at Black communities around the outside of city centers, we were there for cheap labor. We were there because of, slavery existed in Canada. That's not a well-known fact, but it is in fact a fact. And so the impacts of slavery on Nova Scotia population are such that we need repair. And you can talk about reparations in the context of the way that we're reconciling those policies, administrative orders, and all those things that were to keep Blacks out of the city centers, to keep us out of the education system. And that we don't say those things for violins to play and people to feel sorry. Those are actual facts. You can look at The Little Black Schoolhouse, which was a documentary done by Sylvia Hamilton, also from Beachville, which talked about the policies that were in place in Canada around a separate school act, which was similar to the Segregation Act or Jim Crow laws in the United States. Again, something that's not really discussed. And the reason that we have to talk about the historical narrative is because we still live in our history as Black folks. We are impacted by those negative policies still today. And that's why the historical context, I don't talk about anything without the historical context, because until that is totally eradicated and repaired, we will be impacted by that.
I think every day that I engage with people in prison, many of whom are, of course, African Nova Scotians, incarcerated Black people, there's so much resilience there. Just when people call you on behalf of somebody else, they might have one call left and they're calling to say, there's somebody here and he needs medical care. Oh, the guys here can't get smudge. Can you get an elder to come down? They so often advocate for each other, support each other, show so much love, transform their lives, do all kinds of accountability work with each other, the kinds of things we don't imagine take place behind bars. So I think, I always see that and I just think, I don't even write when I'm sitting at home on my couch, and you guys are here writing poetry and, reading and doing all these things that, I would just be curled up in the bed sleeping. So that always amazes me. I think in any kind of case you work, and I've worked on some sort of like big cases. The deportation of Abdul Abdi was obviously one, led by his sister Fatuma, who did not have citizenship, and we successfully stopped that deportation. We're continuing to fight that case. Abdul and Fatuma have a civil suit against the province of Nova Scotia. So it's ongoing. These things don't end. And people often don't know that once it leaves the headlines that you continue to be in relation, you continue to work. But that case took so many people and so much work and so much traumatic stuff happened in that case. But I always talk about how in freedom, when I saw Abdul in Toronto, when he was not being deported, and he ran towards me and he picked me up and swung me around, and I have never felt so much joy in my life. Everybody told us you can't win a deportation case in Canada. Everybody told his lawyer, don't bother going to federal court. You can't do that. Everybody told us like, oh, you guys, you're being disruptive, you're doing these things. And we just fought and fought and fought and fought, led by his sister, again, who was pregnant, who didn't have citizenship, who was facing child welfare, who was facing the full force of the state. And her courage, I always think about her staring down Trudeau at that town hall, Justin Trudeau, the prime minister, standing, 100 meters maybe from, 50 feet, and saying like, why are you deporting my brother? Would you deport your own child? And then standing there. And I think that should be on our money. I always think, that Fatuma, who stood up and had the courage to do that, and it sparked a movement among children living in care, among, so many people. So, and I just think, Fatuma isn't a celebrity activist. She isn't in the news. She isn't on the t-shirts. She's just an ordinary woman. And she just did it from pure love and will, and continues to fight for kids in care and people getting deported. And I think that is inspiring. And that's why I say, when I'm like, we don't need to focus on these firsts and these greats, because we all have that capacity to be great. Fatuma shows us that. Fatuma is a great person who should be on the posters and the money. She did something so amazing there. So that's just one example of many.
And of course, my mother, she was white, but she was she was a powerhouse. And it was this really relaxed Black husband, and she was so high strung and so powerful. And she also would never let my brother and I ever think of ourselves as anything less. And probably if there was something racist in the room, she'd be the first person on them. And we're just going to go, well, you deal with me or deal with her. I'm going to be nicer. It's up to you. So, his spirit was an inspiration from day one. Just a loving man who faced the world as a human being, and with all that came with. And that's sort of who he was as a human being, what he put forth in the world. He was sort of a one man coming together of all nations. Like everyone seemed to just go, Melton's this guy. We all want to be part of his world. And I think that was my inspiration for how I looked at the world, because he was so open, and he was darker skinned. So of course, those of us who are Black understand in the world, the darker you are, unfortunately, the heavier the racism you seem to face on a daily basis. But whatever he faced, he never faced it with an expectation of being on the underside of a foot. He was always walking shoulder to shoulder, and people sort of joined him in his walk forward. And it inspired me to sort of be part of the world in a complete way that helped me look forward as a human being with the pride of being Black, and the openness of just being a person. 2 weeks before he died, I was doing something in Toronto, and I finished this opening night, and I ran on the next day on the flight. And I got there, and they're like, oh, it could be the end. And I walked in, he was like, hey, buddy. I'm like, okay. I thought I was rushing here for something. He was like, till the moment he was gone, he was still filled with love and life. And I feel like, God, let me carry that joy for humanity in the face of any adversity through the rest of my life. It'll be a pretty good life.
Seeing young folks involved in this work is my joy. I see young folks coming along who I am now an elder to, is really, really it inspires me still when I see them, because I'm like, my God, we need to make sure that it continues to happen and that young folks have a voice in this work, and their voice, not us telling them what to do, because our mentors never told us. They threw us in there. It's like, this is what, I remember thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to be talking about, but my mentors were just so confident, in my ability, that I did it anyway. And so providing that for other young people is really, really important in this day and age.
I feel that we have a job, those of us who are becoming elders, especially becoming elders, those of us who have done a journey have a responsibility to pass on the benefits of that journey, the wisdom gained, the strategies, the information, so that our young people who are taking up the job after us, or during the time that we're with them too, that they're not starting over from scratch. We have to stop doing that, in my mind, right? I want to, in all ways possible, whether it be economics, whether it be wisdom, whether it be information, I want to empower the young people with everything that I have done in that journey.
So first of all, don't let anybody question who you are. We face so much shame around, the shade of your skin. You're too dark. Oh, you're not black enough. Oh, this and that. So the first thing is be strong in your identity and don't be shaken. You know who you are. Our ancestors brought us on this path for a reason. We are here for a purpose, and you have that in you. And don't let anybody tell you that you're not smart enough, good enough, you're too white, you're not black enough, you're too black, you're too hood. Whatever these narratives are around us are not narratives that we need to be concerned with. We need to be concerned with ourselves and where we stand and what our ethic is. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just that you have the ability. When I started doing a lot of the work I'm doing, whether that's writing a poem, whether that's like writing an article, whether that's going on the news, I just had to figure that out on my feet. Nobody told me how to do this. You just have to have the courage to do it. If you have something inside you that's trying to come out, don't let people shame you about that. The first time I did a poem on stage, my paper was shaking, I remember standing on stage shaking, but I wanted to say what I had to say. And from that moment, so many of the things I'm doing now came from that. If I hadn't got up on that stage, my life would look so much different. So when you want to do something, even though you're scared, find that courage in yourself and find the friends that will push you forward. Find the comrades around you that will find that best in you and that will challenge you and say, you need to do this, get up there, you can do this. Don't surround yourself with people who are going to bring you down. You really need those people that will help you be the best Black self you can be.
Such a great question for our young people, and this answer could go to any student that has multiple intersecting identities. And the world has called us minorities. We are the visible minorities. We are the marginalized. We are the persons who are silenced or our voices are not listened to. The first thing I would say is when McKinsey did a report on racial inequity in the United States, it said that barriers to racial equity will cost the United States $1 to $1.5 billion by 2028. You are that value. When McKinsey did a report in earlier, when it talked about giving women the tools to reach their full potential, looking beyond North America and through the global South, when that happens, we will have an injection of $28 trillion into our global GDP. These are the minorities. These are the visible minorities. We have that power, but that power only happens when you show up as authentically yourself. Because every pain, every hurt, every mistake, every downfall that you've had joins together with your strengths, your resilience, your determination, your perseverance to create value in you. And therefore, you are an asset to your school, your community, your organization. And that is where that billions of dollars and trillions of dollars come from, because every experience that you have, your Blackness is valuable. Your identity is value. Therefore, you are an asset.
What's on my mind a lot about young folks is, I understand they're kind of disenchanted with, either the history or with the movements, with activism in terms of an old guard, but that they understand their history, they understand the continuity of history, and that their place in it is extremely critical, and not just being complacent or happy with what people put before them as this is their history. Go digging, do your research, find out who those people. Don't be satisfied with just the you see, or those people need to be acknowledged, absolutely. But there's other people probably in their families that have done things that are really, really important, that they do their homework around, knowing the longevity of their existence. All of that is really critical, and that their place in that is one of the most critical things that they can be a part of.
Working with young people over the past 30 years in education, as I have, it's interesting to see I think we have to work with our young people on having that goal set for themselves and setting about achieving that goal. I think that sometimes there's an expectation that it's going to be given to you. And I think that we have to get back to that work ethic, which was something that was ingrained in me, my sisters and brothers, when we were younger, that this is what we need to do. You've got to work hard. And that whole idea of the work ethic. One of the projects I'm working on now is a student athlete symposium. And what I'm doing is trying to share with young people my network of friends, Olympic champions and coaches and physiotherapists and doctors and so on, which is my friend circle that I'm sharing with them, with the hope that they can take that baton and run with it, and have an opportunity to learn from my experience and also their experiences. So take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you. People always say, "Oh, you're lucky, Anton. You're lucky because you got to do this. You got to travel around the world. You got to represent Canada. You got to represent Trinidad. You went to the Olympic Games. This, that, the other." But the idea that luck is where preparedness meets opportunity. And so when I speak to young people about yes, I was lucky, I was fortunate, but there was talent, there was work ethic, there was a lot of perseverance, there was a lot of resilience. I had to overcome many obstacles in achieving the goals that I did. And then it's very important that they, as young people now, take advantage of their opportunities and see them as that, to take advantage of their opportunities to succeed and exceed even their own expectations.
The education that they get in the formal system that just teaches them the basics, how to do how to read, how to write, reading, writing, and arithmetic. They're getting better now, I think, at teaching things like critical thinking skills and so on. But some of the things that you need to really achieve resilience as people of African descent is a deep knowledge of self. So you need to understand your history and that connection to your greatness, your ability to achieve, because those things are not necessarily reflected in the curriculum. And even if we have some bright spots in the curriculum now, the society around us does not value our lives quite in the same way. Hence the necessity for even a statement like Black Lives Matter, which seems obvious to most people. But why do we need to say it? Because there is a problem. And so I think really I would advise that get your formal education, but also do your own work to do the self-education pieces, to learn about our culture and to learn about some of the truths that go beyond what is taught in the formal system.
The thing that I hope for the most from the education system and all the people who are ancillary to it is that we understand that one of the most significant tools in the European global colonial project, one of the most significant tools was in fact the education system. So educators need to understand the history of the very system that they're working in, understand its role in miseducation, and then seek to dismantle it as we know it, or interrupt it as we know it, and seek to educate themselves about actual truth, and then disseminate that truth to the young people that they are responsible for educating. This is extremely important because in the same way that the education system all over the former British colonies, etc., in any or the colonies of European countries, were used as a tool to subjugate, it can also be a tool for liberation. It could be the tool that is used to level the playing field. It could be the tool that is used so that people are no longer in the society walking around and looking at people who are African descendants and assuming their inferiority.
You are enough. You know what I mean? I really don't like narratives that tell Black people that we have to do these things, be respectable. We did something wrong. I think we're always feeling a shame about ourselves, whether that's the shame that so many young people feel about enslavement and are like, oh, we were slaves and that's shameful. I'm like, that's not shameful. Our ancestors survived and they brought us here and they dreamed of freedom. And not only did they survive, but while they were doing that, they still made up dances. They still, kept language. They kept rituals and practices, and they brought us here. We have nothing to be ashamed of as Black people. And everything around us tells us, oh, be ashamed because this Black person's on the news because they did this thing. Oh, be ashamed because Black is this and Black is that. And that is not us. We know who we are. So focus on that. And then just know that whatever you choose and want to do, you can do it in your own way, in your own Black way. There's no thing that Black people don't do or can't do or won't do. If you want to, whatever you want to do, whatever it is, sometimes you want to do things that are like coded very Black. Like we want to play basketball, we want to listen to hip hop, and we should do those things unafraid and unashamed. And sometimes we want to go to the ballet, and then someone's telling us we can't do that. We can do that too. So don't hold yourself back.
Just to recap, 1, learn about the history of the education system. We have an education system that is a great-grandchild of a very colonial education system. And inherent in it is a systemic anti-African approach and a derogation of African and indigenous peoples, simply because they are the people who were enslaved. 2, once learning that, seek to actually dismantle it. Stop teaching people about how important Christopher Columbus was, or Vasco da Gama, etc., and acknowledge their role as pirates who were then sanctioned by Ferdinand and Isabella, because at the time, Europe realized, and the Spanish, the Portuguese, etc., realized that through these people's plunderings, they could gain a benefit.
I'm like somebody who goes out there every day and speaks about race, talks about Black people, I'm like identified with okay, this person does Black stuff, but I am a full person and I am allowed to be whatever kind of full person I want. I can cry, I can be vulnerable, I can be angry. Just because somebody said angry Black woman doesn't mean now I have to watch myself in public. I can be whoever I want, and so can you, because we have the right to be a full human being in whatever way we choose. So don't ever let people tell you our history is lesser. Don't let people tell you that, you have to earn something, that you're not the right kind of person. All of that is just to hold us back.
That type of work in terms of innovation and communities, and at the crux of it, communities understanding what unity means. It's not just a platitude. It's really critical to us having any success in any Black community, whether it be in Nova Scotia or whether it be in Toronto. And I have found those things to be true in both places, and have learned a hell of a lot in Toronto. And I always acknowledge that is that circle of, because I still connect with some of those the old guard, which I love and respect. And I cut my teeth on a lot of activism in Toronto, and was able to come home and put some of that stuff into practice.
If I could share my life with the young people that I come across, man, if they could see what I've seen, it would be amazing. Having a medal put around your neck by the Queen of England herself, and that sort of thing is something that I don't know too many people can say they've experienced. right? And so that's a blessing. And then to represent the country of your birth, and then to represent your adopted country, and to take the pride of putting on the uniform and seeing the flag raised in your name. It's really, really a fantastic experience for me. And so to share that with the people that I come across in my journey now, you can't beat that. Can't beat that.
And then just give to your people. People brought us here. We are here. Not one of us is here because somebody didn't open a door for us. There are people who have sacrificed for us, advocated for us. When nobody wanted us, there's people that held us up. Rocky Jones used to pump his fist in the back when I was doing poetry. No one wanted to hear what I had to say. And Rocky Jones would be there encouraging me, with his fist up in the air. And I felt so good seeing that. When everybody else was like, why is she talking about this at Black History Month? Like, why is she talking about prisons and police? We don't want to hear that. And Rocky would encourage me and let me know. So find those people and let people encourage you and just come into yourself. So that's what I would say, particularly to young people.
That's some of the challenges that we're facing here as well, where young people and those that are active sometimes think that they created the wheel and the activism started with them. We love you, but it didn't. And you have to acknowledge those whose shoulders that you stand on, because those folks kind of paid for some of this with literally blood, sweat, and tears. So that's really important in the context of understanding your history.
If you can conceive it and your heart believes it, then your body can achieve it. And that's what one of the mantras my track coach always said to us. You've got to have it here first. You've got to believe it. If you believe it in your mind, the next thing is, can you believe it in your heart? If you believe it in your heart, then your body will believe it, and you can achieve whatever it is your goal is. So that's the message I would want to leave to young people.
So don't ever make yourself small in any situation for anyone, because you are diminishing your value by doing that. Bring your value everywhere you go.
Just know that the journey is long. It's a long path in life. You will make mistakes. They will change your mind. You'll look back and say, why did I do that? We all make so many mistakes, and you can come back from mistakes. So if you've made a mistake, if you're in a situation, maybe you're in a thing in prison or law, or you got suspended, or you're just coming back to school, whatever's happening to you, you can come back from that. Nobody defines your future. A mistake does not define you. Your past does not define you. So I just say this again because it is true. Our ancestors brought us here for a reason. You are here for a reason, and you can fulfill that purpose, and that is in you, whatever you want to do, and do it.
Thank you so much for offering your time and your wisdom and your experience to this forum. Wishing you all the very, very best.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me. I really wish you well with this project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're beautiful. Thank you.
Happy Black History Month. I hope it's happy. Let's keep it happy.
Here we stand within the arc of time. This moment is yours and it is also mine. There are so many ways and means for us to fail, but we're ready to show the world that we prevail. Now once again we are put to the test, but we want much more than to beat out the rest. We want a world where everybody's strong, so everybody just sing along. Every time you know we're gonna bounce back and take the hit, but we ain't gonna get sacked. Though we're tough, we possess enough slack that when the blow comes, all we do is bounce back. Though they're swinging hard and hope that we'll crack, gonna rope-a-dope around the attack. That's what it means when we tell you we're black. It means when you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. As we look back through our history, all of the stories that make you and me, and time and again you see how we succeed. We fly in the face of all adversity. Every time someone would hold us down, we rise up above and we dust off a crown. as we can see the day is dawning now, and never shall we ever frown. Every time you know we're gonna bounce back, take the hit, but we ain't gonna get sacked. Though we're tough, we possess enough slack that when the blow comes, all we do is bounce back. Though they're swinging hard and hope that we'll crack, gonna rope a dope around the attack. That's what it means when we tell you we're black. It means when you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. It's often said that love will conquer all. Though we love, they still want us to fall. Because we're so big, they try to make us small. But when openly done, we still give it all. Some might think strength is just our greatest thing, but when we get hit, you see right back we spring. When they try to confine us, we let freedom ring. And when they would silence us, that's when we sing. Every time you know we're gonna bounce back, take the hit, but we ain't gonna get sacked. Although we're tough, we possess enough slack that when the blow comes, all we do is bounce back. Though they're swinging hard and hope that we'll crack, gonna rope a dope around the attack. That's what it means when we tell you we're black. If you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. Every time you know we're gonna bounce back, take the hit, but we ain't gonna get sacked. Though we're tough, we possess enough slack that when the blow comes, all we do is bounce back. Though they're swinging hard and hope that we'll crack, gonna rope a dope around the attack. That's what it means when we tell you we're black. It means when you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. Every time we know we're gonna bounce back, take the hit, but we ain't gonna get sacked. Though we're tough, we possess enough slack that when the blow comes, all we do is bounce back. Though they're swinging hard and hope that we'll crack, gonna rope a dope around the attack. That's what it means when we tell you we're black. It means when you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. It means when you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. You strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. When you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. When you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. When you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. When you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. When you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back. When you strike at us, we're gonna bounce back.
Well, good evening, everyone. I am Cheryl Boughton, head of St. John's Kilmarnock School, and we are absolutely delighted to be one of the partners for tonight's program. So we trust you enjoyed the presentation put together by the very talented Andrew Craig. And it was also just so wonderful to hear those speakers with their powerful, engaging, and thought-provoking stories. Now, I have the privilege of working with Andrew every day. So as you can imagine, he is a wonderful colleague, and he and I have had some excellent conversations over the years. And now it's your chance to take part in a conversation with Andrew. So we hope that you will use the Q&A function. I know that some people have been trying to raise their hand, but we do need people to put their questions into the Q&A, and then I will moderate them and Andrew will answer them. So thanks for joining us, Andrew. And if you're ready, we'll start with the first question. So this is a question from Alan. Caroline Wright briefly brought up the theme of reparation. What might reparation look like in the context of the history of Blacks in Canada?
Wow, that's a great question and a really challenging one, because I think typically when the conversation around reparation occurs, people start thinking that it's about writing a big, huge check that goes to anybody who identifies with a certain percentage of melanin. And even if that was an economically feasible option, and I think most people would likely have questions around that, I don't know that that's really how any form of reparations that's manageable or conceivable could really work. I think that it almost actually has to zoom out beyond the Black question. And it's a very important question for Black people, because
of the disproportionate treatment that we've received. But that's equally true in the case of Indigenous people in this country. It's equally true of people who are descendants of those Japanese folks who were in internment in World War II. The list goes on. You can find plenty of egregious examples at the hands of the Canadian government on how people were treated in a way that is at the very most charitable unfair. I think what we're talking about here is a situation in which there's a general understanding that wealth has been traditionally distributed in an unfair fashion, that it's concentrated with some people and not with others. And I think that the work towards reparations really will come from what I hope is a growing understanding and perhaps even willingness on people's part generally to have wealth redistribution happen throughout society. And there's so many mechanisms by which that would have to occur. It's not just a governmental thing, but the reality is that there are the haves would actually have to have less so that the have-nots could have more. And that's a challenging question for people to confront. What do you mean? You know, it means that if you are a person who enjoys the privilege of ownership and the privilege of access, that some of that might have to be given up in order for others who have traditionally not had it be brought into a place of equality with you. It's an uncomfortable conversation for the haves because people love the idea of making things equal without necessarily the rubber having to hit the road. And I think reparations is not just about the government issuing a certain amount of money. I think it's about finding ways throughout the system to re-engineer it so that there is income distribution equality, access, opportunity equality throughout.
Thank you for that. Now I have a question that sort of follows on from that. You know, we're talking about reparations, and I think generally we see many organizations are embarking on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts or initiatives. And I wonder, what do you think should be the goal of such efforts? And if organizations are embarking in these important conversations, what should be our goal and what would you call success?
Those are actually two questions, and I'll see if I can parse them out a little bit. 2020 did a lot of things for a lot of people. And a couple of those things were, it brought these conversations which people of African descent have been having in their homes and in their churches and in their businesses and in their places of gathering for decades, if not centuries. It brought them into the global dialogue. Now, suddenly, the entire world was hearing that, you know what, we haven't just been saying it, it's actually true. Here's our lived experience. And here's, unfortunately, the most egregious example, but it's not the newest, it's not the latest, sorry, it's not the only example, it's just the latest. And we may never know what it was about the particular moment, we can speculate, but what it is about the particular moment when George Floyd was murdered that suddenly sparked this global dialogue. Well, now the dialogue's begun, but it's no longer in the headlines. It's no longer occupying the forefront of our consciousness. And there are plenty of reasons for that too. We are unfortunately heavily manipulated by media. We pay attention to that which we are told to pay attention to. And we were told back then by the media, pay attention to this. And so we did. But this is the lived experience of folks who look like me. So there was a general response from individuals and organizations alike saying, we want to demonstrate our allyship. We want to say that we are in support of these initiatives. We want to say that we disavow and disallow and decry racist activity, the activity that is insensitive, unequal, all of that. And statements were made and put out. And it's very challenging now, several months later, to not see a lot of that as checking the box. Right? Okay, so we made sure that in the public's view, we were on the right side of history. But putting you on the right side of history is not a single statement that gets made. It means substantive institutional change. It means organizations looking very deeply inward to say, how did we create the situation that has our leadership, for example, being 100%, 90%, 80% white? How do we create a situation where our membership or our employees or our staff complement, our human resource doesn't have a reflection of the society that's intended to serve? It requires a great deal of introspection, and it also requires a great deal of willingness to then modify things moving forward to allow for those opportunities to be made real for people who are racialized. And you know, the other thing I'll say about that is that oftentimes, in my view, these actions, when they are undertaken in earnest, come from a place that is slightly obligatory. Well, you know, it's the thing that we should do because it's the right thing to do, and we feel a moral imperative. And that moral imperative is good, but it's almost a limited way of viewing it, because the reality is that racialized people who have suffered for so long in this country, in the United States, and other places, have so much to offer. There's such a tremendous potential for growth and development and progress by including. And if all that you cared about was money, there would be an economic imperative for doing so. So I think to answer your questions, or to bring the two of them together, the kinds of work that institutions have to do is to examine on multiple levels how they got to the now and what opportunities they're missing when they don't create a more diverse and inclusive environment.
Thank you for that. Now, we did have one question where someone was just wondering if you're available to do presentations to different organizations. So I would imagine that you would be willing to work with someone else on a presentation if it worked into your schedule. So perhaps we could give that person your contact information.
Of course, the answer to that is an unequivocal yes. Part of my work outside of SJK is community advocacy and education and training. These things are very dear to me, and I recognize that people are looking for resources and looking for people to come and help guide their thinking. The work still has to be done on the part of the individuals and the organizations, but ultimately there needs to be guidance offered by people who are coming from my experience. And I feel like I'm a very small voice in that. We just heard from 6, 7 very powerful people who exercise their power in a very soft but very meaningful way. I feel like they almost have more to say than I would have to say in some ways. And as Carol Ann pointed out, we have to be aware of those who came before us and on whose shoulders we stand. All of my activism is based on an understanding that I am one person in a continuum of activists working for social change. So in the same way that I stand on people's shoulders, I have a responsibility and obligation to push forward the agenda. So yes, I am actually quite available to assist in that way. You can go to the Culchahworks website, which is culchahworks.ca, and there's a response page in there by which you can send an email. That's probably the easiest way.
That's great, thank you. And I think we just have one final question, and then we'll wrap things up. The final question was, how would you change the education system to ensure that the history and contribution of African and Black people are taught?
That's a fascinating question, and I could offer an answer that's lengthy, and I'll try to do my best to make it succinct. I say this quite often in conversations. If you stop the average person on the street, I don't care the age or the generation, and you ask them to give you a 30-second précis of the history of Canada, it would probably go something like this. Well, first the Indigenous folks were here, and then the French showed up, and they coordinated with them, they traded, and then the English showed up, and then they squabbled over who got what. And the English fought a whole bunch and eventually prevailed. Along the way, a lot of Indigenous folks died and suffered handily. The English managed to take over most of the country, the French got a little piece of it, and then we're here. And I might be wrong, or perhaps less than charitable, but I imagine most folks, that's a version of the answer they would provide. And that doesn't go anywhere towards explaining how Canada in 2021 is one of the most diverse nations on earth. It just doesn't. It doesn't account for all of those parallel narratives that explain how we got to now. I also like to talk about Canada as an ongoing social, cultural experiment. Very few countries have ever endeavored to do what it is that we're doing. And as the world actually becomes more xenophobic, Canada stands out as a bit of a beacon with respect to how it tries to not integrate, but respect the diversity of people who have come to live here and work here and raise families here, while having a common identity, which we call Canadian, that no one can truly define carefully. That doesn't mean that Canada has a shining record. We have lots of flaws in our record, but we are engaged in this ongoing social experiment. And part of getting the experiment right is making sure that the narratives that we carry forward include all the people who were a part of making what we have. So history needs to be taught differently. Part of the reason, one of the main raison d'etre for Culchahworks is to find the stories that come from the Black experience that are existing on their margins and to retell those stories in a way that is engaging. And the end game is to ultimately change the narrative about what Canada is and how it got created. Now, I don't feel like I personally have the agency to tell the story of Korean Canadians or Iranian Canadians or Polish Canadians or any other group for which I am not actually ethnically a part. But I do feel like I have agency in telling the stories of my own people, be they Caribbeans or African Nova Scotians or Africans from any part of the diaspora. So I'm using my voice in this way. And I feel like so much of the work that I have done and so much of what I've seen really indicates that empowering people to tell those stories in a way that actually engages everyone, rewriting, tossing out the old history books and replacing them with a history account that really incorporates all of us is what's going to move the dial in a measurable, beneficial way for all of Canada and ultimately the world.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I think you certainly did that in your presentation this evening. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I think we'll turn it over to Bishop Price to say a few words of closing.
Good evening, folks. My name is Michael Price. I'm the Bishop of the Eastern Synod. We are one of the sponsors of this evening's gatherings. I hope you all can hear me. There we are. Hi, Andrew. I sure did drink deep from the drinking gourd tonight, and it was refreshing, and it was good, and it was nourishing. And I think I'm speaking on behalf of all of us who are here this evening. It was so precious to spend this time with you. We thank you for sharing your own person with us, the gifts of music and even dance that we experienced tonight, and the gifts of your friends, Caroline Wright, Tom Allison, Janelle Scarrett, Kwame Williams, Selena Cesar, Siobhan, Anton Scarrett, and Elle Jones, who incidentally is going to be spending a couple of days with us in late April at an event that we are hosting. What you shared with us, what they shared with us, is precious and it's powerful. It's so powerful. Story, history, and it's perceived as dangerous by some. I suppose that's why it's been quieted, why it's been suppressed. Last year, pre-COVID, I was able to go with some of my Nova Scotia colleagues to visit the Birchtown Black History Center in Birchtown, Nova Scotia. As a part of the work that my colleagues there are doing to try and learn and renew their own perspectives. One of the things I learned there is that in 2005, that facility was attacked by an arsonist who wanted to destroy the stories and to destroy the history, because stories and history have the capacity to change us, to change our world. When you began this evening, Andrew, you expressed the hope that our time together would be illuminating, inspirational, powerful, and ultimately transformational. It was certainly the first three: illuminating, inspiration, and powerful. And I suppose it's all of our work, those of us who have gathered tonight, to determine how transformational it is. You gave us a lot of help in that task. And we're truly, truly grateful to have met a new friend, new friends. Thank you and God bless you in the holy work that you do. Brothers and sisters, thank you for gathering. Sleep well tonight. Be transformed. Amen.